everybody. Welcome back as I continue to read Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters. Chapter 4. Tyson Plays with Fire. Mythologically speaking, if there's anything I hate worse than trios of old ladies, is bulls. Last summer, I fought the Minotaur on top of Half-Blood Hill. This time, what I saw up there was even worse. 2 bulls. And not just regular bulls. Bronze one the size of elephants. And even that wasn't bad enough. Naturally, they had to breathe fire, too. As soon as we exited the taxi, the Grey sisters peeled out, heading back to New York, where life was safer. They didn't even wait for their extra 3 drachma payment. They just left us on the side of the road. Annabeth, with nothing but her backpack and a knife, Tyson and me, still in our burnt-up tie-dye gym clothes. "Oh, man," Annabeth said, looking at the battle raging over the hill. What worried me weren't the bulls themselves, or the 10 heroes in full battle armor who were getting their bronze-plated booties whipped. What worried me was that the bulls were raging over the hill, even around the backside of the pine tree. That shouldn't have been possible. The camp's magical boundaries didn't allow monsters to cross past Talia's tree, but the metal bulls were doing it anyways. Out of one of the heroes shouted, "Border Patrol, to me!" A girl's voice, gruff and familiar. Border Patrol, I thought. The camp didn't have a border patrol. "It's Clarice," Annabeth said. "Come on, we have to help her." Normally, rushing to Clarice's aid would not have been high on my to-do list. She was one of the biggest bullies at camp. The first time we met, she tried to introduce my head to a toilet. She was also a daughter of Ares, who I had a very serious disagreement with her father last summer. So now the god of war and all of his children hated my guts. Still, she was in trouble. Her fellow warriors were scattered, running in panic as the bulls charged. The grass was burning in huge swatches around the pine tree. One hero screamed and waved his arms as he ran in circles, the horsehair plume on his helmet blazing like a fiery mohawk. Clarice's own armor was charred. She was fighting with a broken spear shaft, the other end embedded uselessly in the metal joint of one of the bull's shoulders. I uncapped my ballpoint pen. It shimmered, growing longer and heavier until I held the bronze sword and a clumas in my hands. "Tyson, stay here. I don't want you taking any more chances." "No," Annabeth said. "We need him." I stared at her. "He's mortal. He got lucky with the dodgeballs, but he can't... Percy, do you know what those are up there?" "The Conchus bulls, made by Hephaestus himself. We can't fight them without Meta sunscreen. FPS 5,000. We'll get burned to a crisp." "Meta's what?" Annabeth rummaged through her backpack and cursed. "I had a jar of tropical coconut sitting on my nightstand at home. Why didn't I bring it?" I learned a long time ago not to question Annabeth too much. It just made me more confused. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about, but I am not going to let Tyson get fried." "Percy." "Tyson, stay back." I raised my sword. "I'm going in." Tyson tried to protest, but I was already running up the hill towards Clarice, who was yelling at her patrol, trying to get them into phalanx formation. It was a good idea. The few who were listening lined up shoulder to shoulder, locking their shields to form an ox-hide and bronze wall, their spears bristling over the top like porcupine quills. Unfortunately, Clarice could only muster 6 campers. The other 4 were still running around with their helmets on fire. Annabeth ran towards them, trying to help. She taunted one of the bulls into chasing her, and then turned invisible, completely confusing the monster. The other bull charged Clarice's line. I was halfway up the hill, not close enough to help. Clarice hadn't even seen me yet. The bull moved deadly fast for something so big, its metal hide gleaming in the sun. It had fist-sized rubies for eyes, horns of polished silver. When it opened its hinged mouth, a column of white-hot flame blasted out. Hold the line, Clarice ordered her warriors. Whatever else you could say about Clarice, she was brave. She was a big girl with cruel eyes like her father's. She looked like she was born to wear Greek battle armor, but I didn't see how she could stand against the bull's charge. Unfortunately, at that moment, the other bull lost interest in fighting Annabeth. It turned, wheeling around behind Clarice on her unprotected side. "Behind you!" I yelled. "Look out!" I shouldn't have said anything, because all I did was startle her. Bull number 1 crashed into her shield and her phalanx broke. Clarice went flying backwards and landed in a smoldering patch of grass. The bull charged past her, but not before blasting the other heroes with its fiery breath. Their shields melted right off their arms. They dropped their weapons and ran as bull number 2 closed in on Clarice for the kill. I lunged forward and grabbed Clarice by the straps of her armor. I dragged her out of the way just as bull number 2 trained past. I gave it a good swipe with Riptide and cut a huge gash out of the flank, but the monster just creaked and groaned and kept on going. It hadn't touched me, but I could feel the heat of its metal skin. Its body temperature could have microwaved a frozen burrito. "Let me go!" Clarice pummeled my hand. "Percy, curse you!" I dropped her in a heap next to the pine tree and turned to face the bulls. We were on the inside slope of the hill. The valley of Camp Half-Blood directly below us, the cabins, the training facilities, the big house, all of it, at risk if these bulls got past us. Annabeth shouted orders at the other heroes, telling them to spread out and keep the bulls distracted. Bull number 1 ran a wide arc, making its way back towards me. As it passed the middle of the hill, where the invisible boundary line should have kept it out, it slowed down a little, as if it were struggling against a strong wind, but then it broke through and kept coming. Bull number 2 turned to face me, fire sputtering from the gash I'd cut in its side. I couldn't tell if it felt any pain, but its ruby eyes glared at me like I'd just make things personal. I couldn't fight both bulls at the same time. I'd have to take down bull number 2 first, cut its head off before bull number 1 charged back into range. My arms already felt tired. I realized how long it had been since I worked with Riptide, how out of practice I was. I lunged, but bull number 2 blew flames at me. I rolled aside as the air turned to pure heat. All the oxygen was sucked out of my lungs. My foot caught something, a tree root maybe, and pain shot up my ankle. Still, I managed to slash it with my sword and lop off part of the monster's snout. It galloped away, wild and disoriented. But before I could feel too good about that, I tried to stand, and my leg buckled underneath me. My ankle was sprained, maybe broken. Bull number 1 charged straight towards me. No way I could crawl out of its path. Annabeth shouted, "Tyson, help him!" Somewhere near, towards the crest of the hill, Tyson wailed, "Can't get through. Annabeth Chase, give you permission to enter camp." Thunder shook the hillside. Suddenly Tyson was there, barreling towards me, yelling, "Percy needs help." Before I could tell him no, he dove between me and the bull as it unleashed a nuclear firestorm. "Tyson!" I yelled. The blast swirled around him like a red tornado. I knew with horrible certainty that my friend had just been turned into a column of ashes. But when the fire died, Tyson was still standing there, completely unharmed. Not even his clothes were scorched. The bull must have been as surprised as I was, because, before it could unleash a second blast, Tyson balled his fist and slammed them into the bull's face. "Bad cow!" His fist made a crater where the bronze bull's snout used to be. 2 small columns of flame shot out of its ears. Tyson hit it again, and the bronze crumpled under his hands like aluminum foil. The bull's face now looked like a sock puppet pulled inside out. "Down!" Tyson yelled. The bull staggered and fell on its back. Its leg moved feebly in the air, steam coming out of its ruined head in odd places. Annabeth ran over to check on me. My ankle felt like it was filled with acid, but she gave me some Olympian nectar to drink from her canteen, and I immediately started to feel better. There was a burning smell that I later learned was me. The hair on my arms had been completely singed off. "The other bull?" I asked. Annabeth pointed down the hill. Clarice had taken care of bad cow number 2. She impaled it through the back of the leg with its celestial bronze spear. Now, with its snout half gone and a huge gash in its side, it was trying to run in slow motion, going in circles like some kind of merry-go-round animal. Clarice pulled her helmet off and marched towards us. A strand of her stringy brown hair was smoldering, but she didn't seem to notice. "You ruined everything," she yelled at me. "I had it under control." I was too stunned to answer. Annabeth grumbled. "Good to see you too, Clarice." "Ugh!" Clarice screamed. "Don't ever try saving me again." "Clarice," Annabeth said, "you've got wounded campers." That sobered her up. Even Clarice cared about the soldiers under her command. "I'll be back," she growled, and then trudged off to assess the damage. I stared at Tyson. "You didn't die." Tyson looked down like he was embarrassed. "I'm sorry. Came to help. Disobeyed you." "My fault," Annabeth said. "I had no choice. I had to let Tyson cross the boundary line to save you. Otherwise, you would have died." "Let him cross the boundary line?" I asked. "But, Percy," she said, "have you ever looked at Tyson closely? I mean, in the face. Ignore the mist and really look at him." "The mist makes humans see only what their brains can process, but I knew it could fool demigods too, but..." I looked Tyson in the face. It wasn't easy. I'd always had trouble directly looking at him, though I'd never quite understood why. I thought it was because he had peanut butter in his crooked teeth. I forced myself to focus on his nose, and then a little higher at his eyes. No, not eyes. One eye. One large calf-brown eye, right in the middle of his forehead, with thick lashes and big tears trickling down his cheeks on the other side. "Tyson," I stammered, "you're a..." "Cyclops," Annabeth offered. "A baby by the looks of him. Probably why he couldn't get past the boundary lines as easy as the bulls. Tyson's one of the homeless orphans." "One of the what?" "They're in almost all the big cities," Annabeth said distastefully. "They're mistakes, Percy. Children of nature, spirits, and gods. Well, one god in particular, usually. And they don't always come out right. No one wants them. They get tossed aside. They grow up wild on the streets. I don't know how this one found you, but he obviously likes you. We should take him to Chiron, let him decide what to do." "But the fire, how..." "He's a Cyclops." Annabeth paused as if she were remembering something unpleasant. "They work the forges of the gods. They have to be immune to fire. That's what I was trying to tell you." I was completely shocked. How had I never realized what Tyson was? But I didn't have much time to think about it just then. The whole side of the hill was burning. Wounded heroes needed attention, and there were still 2 banged-up bronze bulls to dispose of, which I didn't figure would fit in our normal recycling bins. Clarice came back over and wiped the soot off her forehead. "Jackson, if you can stand, get up. We need to carry the wounded back to the big house. Let Tantalus know what happened." "Tantalus?" I asked. "The activities director," Clarice said impatiently. "Chiron's the activity director. And where's Argius? He's head of security. He should be here." Clarice made a sour face. "Argius got fired. You two have been gone too long. Things are changing." "But Chiron, he's trained kids to fight monsters for over 3,000 years. He can't just be gone. What happened?" "That happened," Clarice snapped. She pointed to Talia's tree. Every camper knew the story of the tree. 6 years ago, Grover, Annabeth, and 2 other demigods named Talia and Luke had come to Camp Half-Blood, chased by an army of monsters. When they got cornered on the top of the hill, Talia, a daughter of Zeus, had made her last stand to give her friends time to reach safety. As she was dying, her father Zeus took pity on her and changed her into a pine tree. Her spirits had reinforced the magic borders of the camp, protecting it from monsters. The pine had been here ever since, strong and healthy. But now, its needles were yellow. A huge pile of dead ones littered the base of the tree. In the center of the trunk, 3 feet from the ground, was a puncture mark the size of a bullet hole, oozing green sap. A sliver of ice ran through my chest. Now I understood why the camp was in danger. The magic borders were failing because Talia's tree was dying. Someone had poisoned it. That was the end of Chapter 4. Let's continue with Chapter 5. 5. I get a new cabin mate. Ever come home and found your room messed up? Like some helpful person, hi Mom, has tried to clean it, and suddenly you can't find anything? And even if nothing's missing, you get that creepy feeling that somebody's been looking through your private stuff and dusting everything with lemon furniture polish. That's kind of the way I felt seeing Camp Half-Blood again. On the surface, things didn't look all that different. The big house was still there with its blue gabled roof and its wraparound porch. The strawberry fields still baked in the sun. The same white-columned Greek buildings were scattered around the valley, the amphitheater, the combat arena, the dining pavilion overlooking the Long Island Sound, and nestled between the woods and the creek were the same cabins, a crazy assortment of the 12 buildings, each representing a different Olympian god. But there was an air of danger now. You could tell something was wrong. Instead of playing volleyball in the sandpit, counselors and satyrs were stockpiling weapons in the tool shed. Dryads armed themselves with bows and arrows, talked nervously around the edge of the woods. The forest looked sickly. The grass in the meadow was pale yellow, and the fire marks on Half-Blood Hill stood out like ugly scars. Somebody had messed with my favorite place in the world, and I was not a happy camper. As we made our way to the big house, I recognized a lot of kids from last summer. Nobody stopped to talk. Nobody said, "Welcome back." Some did double takes when they saw Tyson, but most just walked grimly past and carried on with their duties. Running messages, sharpening swords on grinding wheels. The camp felt like a military school, and believe me, I know. I've been kicked out of a couple. None of that mattered to Tyson. He was absolutely fascinated by everything he saw. "What's that?" he gasped. "The stable for Pegasi," I said. "The winged horses." "What's that?" Those are the toilets." "What's that?" "The cabins for the campers. If they don't know who your Olympian parent is, they'll put you in the Hermes cabin, the brown one over there, until you're determined. Then, once they know, they put you in your mom or dad's group." He looked at me in awe. "You have a cabin?" "Number 3. I pointed to the low gray building made of sea stone. "You live with friends in the cabin?" No, just me." I didn't feel like explaining the embarrassing truth. I was the only one staying in the cabin because I wasn't supposed to be alive. The big 3 gods, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, had made a pact after World War II to not have any more children with mortals. We were more powerful than regular half-bloods. We were too unpredictable. When we got mad, we tended to cause problems, like World War II, for instance. The big 3 pact had only been broken twice. Once when Zeus sired Talia, and once when Poseidon sired me. Neither of us should have been born. Talia had gotten herself turned into a pine tree when she was 12. Me, well, I was trying my best not to follow her example. I had nightmares about what Poseidon might turn me into if I were ever on the verge of death. Plankton, maybe? Or a floating patch of kelp? When we got to the big house, we found Chiron in his apartment, listening to his favorite 1960s lounge music while he packed his saddlebags. I guess I should mention, Chiron is a centaur. From the waist up, he looks like a regular middle-aged guy with curly brown hair and a scraggly beard. From the waist down, he's a white stallion. He can pass for a human by compacting his lower half into a magic wheelchair. In fact, he passed himself off as my Latin teacher during my 6th grade year. But most of the time, if the ceilings were high enough, he prefers hanging out in full centaur form. As soon as we saw him, Tyson froze. "Pony!" he cried in total rapture. Chiron turned, looking offended. I beg your pardon?" Annabeth ran up and hugged him. "Chiron, what's happening? You're not leaving?" Her voice was shaky. Chiron was like a second father to her. Chiron ruffled her hair and gave her a kindly smile. "Hello, child. And Percy, my goodness, you've grown over the year." I swallowed. "Clarice said you were fired." Chiron's eyes glinted with dark humor. Well, someone had to take the blame. Lord Zeus was most upset. The tree he'd created from the spirit of his daughter poisoned. Mr. D had to punish someone. "Besides himself, you mean?" I growled. Just the thought of the camp director, Mr. D, made me angry. "But this is crazy," Annabeth cried. "Chiron, you couldn't have done anything to do with the poisoning of Talia's tree." "Nevertheless," Chiron sighed, "some in Olympus do not trust me, under the circumstances." "What circumstances?" I asked. Chiron's face darkened. He stuffed a Latin-English dictionary into a saddlebag, while Frank Sinatra played in the back from his boombox. Tyson was still staring at Chiron in amazement. He whimpered like he wanted to pat Chiron's flank, but he was afraid to come closer. "Pony?" Chiron sniffled. "My dear young Cyclops, I am a centaur." "Chiron," I said, "what about the tree? What happened?" He shook his head sadly. "The poison used on Talia's pine is something from the underworld, Percy. Some venom I have never seen. It must have come from a monster quite deep in the pit of Tartarus." "Then we know who's responsible, "Do not invoke the Titan Lord's name, Percy. Especially not here. Not now." "But last summer he tried to cause a civil war. This has to be his idea. He'd get Luke to do it, that traitor." "Perhaps," Chiron said. "But I fear I am being held responsible because I did not prevent it, and I cannot cure it. The tree only has a few weeks of life, unless—" "Unless what?" Annabeth asked. "No," Chiron said. "A foolish thought. The whole valley is feeling the shock of the poison. The magical borders are deteriorating. The camp itself is dying. Only one source of magic would be strong enough to reverse the poison, and it was lost centuries ago." "What is it?" I asked. "We'll go find it." Chiron closed his saddlebag. He pressed the stop button on his boombox. Then he turned and rested his hand on my shoulder, looking me straight in the eyes. "Percy, you must promise me that you will not act rashly. I told your mother I did not want you to come here at all this summer. It's much too dangerous. But now that you're here, stay here. Train hard, learn to fight, but do not leave." "Why?" I asked. "I want to do something. I can't just let the borders fail. The whole camp will be—" "Overrun by monsters," Chiron said. "Yes, I fear so. But you must not let yourself be baited into hasty action. This could be a trap of the Titan Lord. Remember last summer he almost took your life. It was true, but still, I wanted to help so badly. I also wanted to make Kronos pay. I mean, you'd think the Titan Lord would have learned his lesson eons ago when he was overthrown by the gods. You'd think that getting chopped up into a million pieces and cast into the darkest part of the underworld would have given him a subtle clue that nobody wanted him around. But no. Because he was immortal, he was still alive down there in Tartarus, suffering in eternal pain, hungering to return and take revenge on Olympias. He couldn't act on his own, but he was great at twisting the minds of mortals and even gods to do his dirty work. The poisoning had to be his doing. Who else could be so low as to attack Talia's tree? The only thing left of a hero who'd given her life to save her friends. Annabeth was trying hard not to cry. Chiron brushed a tear from her cheek. "Stay with Percy, child," he told her. "Keep him here. The prophecy, remember it." I will. I said, "Would this be the super dangerous prophecy that has me in it, but the gods have forbidden you to tell me about?" Nobody answered. "Right," I muttered. "Just checking." "Chiron," Annabeth said, "you told me the gods made you immortal so long you were needed to train heroes. If they dismiss you from camp..." "Swear that you will do your best to keep Percy from danger," he insisted. "Swear upon the river Styx." "I swear it upon the river Styx," Annabeth said. Thunder rumbled outside. "Very well," Chiron said. He seemed to relax a little. "Perhaps my name will be cleared and I shall return. Until then, I go visit my wild kinsmen in the Everglades. It's possible they know some of the cure for the poison tree that I have forgotten. In any event, I will stay in exile until the matter is resolved, one way or another." Annabeth stifled a sob. Chiron patted her shoulder awkwardly. "There now, child. I must entrust your safety to Mr. D and the new activities director. We must hope. Well, perhaps they won't destroy the camp quite as quickly as I fear." "Who is this Tantalus guy anyway?" I demanded. "Where does he get off taking your job?" A conch horn blew across the valley. I hadn't realized how late it was. It was time for the campers to assemble for dinner. "Go," Chiron said. "You will meet him at the pavilion. I will contact your mother, Percy, and let her know you're safe. No doubt she'll be worried by now. Just remember my warning. You are in grave danger. Do not think for a moment that the Titan Lord has forgotten you." With that, he clopped out of the apartment and down the hall. Tyson called after him, "Pony, don't go." I realized I'd forgotten to tell Chiron about my dream of Grover. Now it was too late. The best teacher I'd ever had was gone, maybe for good. Tyson started bawling almost as bad as Annabeth. I tried to tell them that things would be okay, but I didn't believe it. The sun was setting behind the dining pavilion as the campers came from their cabin. We stood in the shadow of the marble column and watched them file in. Annabeth was still pretty shaken up, but she promised she'd talk to us later. Then she went off to join her siblings from the Athena cabin. A dozen boys and girls with blonde hair and gray eyes like hers. Annabeth wasn't the oldest, but she'd been at camp more summers than about anybody. You could tell that by the camp bead necklace. 1 bead for every summer. And Annabeth had 6. No one questioned her right to lead the line. Next came Clarice, leading the Ares cabin. She had 1 arm in a sling and a nasty-looking gash on her cheek, but otherwise her encounter with the bronze bull didn't seem to have fazed her. Someone had taped a piece of paper to her back that said, "You moo, girl," but nobody in her cabin was bothering to tell her about it. After the Ares kids came the Hephaestus cabin. 6 guys led by Charles Beckendorf, a big 15-year-old African-American kid. He had hands the size of catchers, and a face that was hard and squinty from looking in a blacksmith forge all day. He was nice enough once you got to know him, but no one ever called him Charlie or Chuck or Charles. Most just called him Beckendorf. Rumor was he could make anything. Give him a chunk of metal, and he could create a razor-sharp sword, or a robotic warrior, or a singing bird bath for your grandmother's garden. Whatever it was you wanted. The other cabins filed in. Demeter, Apollo, Aphrodite, Dionysus. Naiads came from the canoe lake. Dryads melted out of the trees. From the meadow came a dozen satyrs, who reminded me painfully of Grover. I'd always had a soft spot for the satyrs. When they were at camp, they had to do all kind of odd jobs for Mr. D, the director, but their most important work was out in the real world. They were the camp seekers. They went undercover into schools all over the world looking for the potential half-bloods and escorting them back to camp. That's how I'd met Grover. He'd been the first one to recognize I was a demigod. After the satyrs filed into dinner, the Hermes cabin brought up the rear. They were always the biggest cabin. Last summer, it had been led by Luke, a guy who fought with Talia and Annabeth on top of Half-Blood Hill. For a while, before Poseidon had claimed me, I'd lodged in the Hermes cabin. Luke had befriended me. Then he tried to kill me. Now the Hermes cabin was led by Travis and Connor Stoll. They weren't twins, but they looked so much alike it didn't matter. I could never remember which one was older. They were both tall and skinny, with mops of brown hair clung to their eyes. They wore orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts untucked over baggy shorts, and they had those elfish features all Hermes kids had. Upturned eyebrows, sarcastic smiles, and a gleam in their eye whenever they looked at you, like they were about to drop a firecracker down your shirt. I'd always thought it was funny that the god of thieves would have kids with the last name Stoll. But the only time I mentioned it to Travis and Connor, they stared at me blankly like they didn't get the joke. As soon as the last campers had filed in, I led Tyson to the middle of the pavilion. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. "Who invited that?" somebody at the Apollo table muttered. I glared in their direction, but I couldn't figure out who'd spoken. From the head table, a familiar voice drawled, "Well, if it isn't Peter Johnson, my millennium is complete." I gritted my teeth. "Percy Jackson, sir." Mr. D sipped his Diet Coke. "Yes, well, as you young people say these days, whatever." He was wearing his usual leopard pattern Hawaiian shirt, walking shorts and tennis shoes with black socks. With his pudgy belly and his blotchy red face, he looked like a Las Vegas tourist who'd stayed a little too late in the casino. Behind him, a nervous-looking satyr was peeling the skin off grapes and handing them to Mr. D one at a time. Mr. D's real name is Dionysus, the god of wine. Zeus appointed him as the director of Camp Half-Blood to dry out for 100 years, a punishment for chasing some off-limits wood nymph. Next to him, where Chiron usually sat or stood in centaur form, was someone I'd never seen before. A pale, horribly thin man in a threadbare orange prisoner's jumpsuit. The number over his pocket read 0001. He had blue shadows under his eyes, dirty fingernails, and badly cut gray hair, like his last haircut had been done with a weed whacker. He stared at me. His eyes made me nervous. He looked fractured, angry and frustrated and hungry all at the same time. "This boy," Dionysus told him, "you need to watch for. Poseidon's child, you know." "Ah," the prisoner said, "that one." His tone made it obvious that he and Dionysus had already discussed me at length. "I'm Tantalus," the prisoner said, smiling coldly. "On special assignment here. Well, until my lord Dionysus decides otherwise. And you, Perseus Jackson, I do expect you to refrain from causing any more trouble. Trouble? I demanded. Dionysus snapped his fingers. A newspaper appeared on the table. The front page of the New York Post. There was my yearbook picture from Meriwether Prep. It was hard for me to make out the headline, but I had a pretty good guess. Something like 13-year-old lunatic torches gymnasium. Yes, trouble, Tantalus said with satisfaction. You caused plenty of it last summer, I understand. I was too mad to speak. Like it was my fault the gods had almost gotten into a civil war. A satyr inched forward nervously and set a place of barbecue in front of Tantalus. The new activities director licked his lips. He looked at his empty goblet and said, Root beer, Bark Special Stock, 1967. The glass filled itself with foamy soda. Tantalus stretched out his hand hesitantly, as if he were afraid the goblet was hot. Go on then, old fellow, Dionysus said with a strange sparkle in his eye. Perhaps now it will work. Tantalus grabbed for the glass, but it scooted away before he could touch it. A few drops of root beer spilled, and Tantalus tried to dab them up with his finger. But the drops rolled away, like quicksilver, before he could touch them. He growled and turned to the plate of barbecue. He picked up a fork and tried to stab a piece of brisket, but the plate skidded down the table and flew off the end, straight into the coals of the brazier. Blast! Tantalus muttered. Ah, well, Dionysus said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Perhaps a few more days. Believe me, old chap, working at this camp will be torture enough. I'm sure your old curse will fade eventually. Eventually, muttered Tantalus, staring at Dionysus' Diet Coke. Do you have any idea how dry one's throat gets after 3,000 years? You're that spirit from the fields of punishment, I said. The one who stands in the lake with the fruit tree hanging over you, but you can't eat or drink. Tantalus sneered at me. A real scholar, aren't you, boy? You must have done something pretty horrible when you were alive, I said, mildly impressed. What was it? Tantalus' eyes narrowed. Behind him, the satyrs were shaking their heads vigorously, trying to warn me. I'll be watching you, Percy Jackson, Tantalus said. I don't want any problems at my camp. Your camp already has problems, sir. Oh, go sit down, Johnson, Dionysus sighed. I believe that table over there is yours, the one where no one else ever wants to sit. My face was burning, but I knew better than to talk back. Dionysus was an overgrown brat, and he was immortal, super-powerful overgrown brat, I said. Come on, Tyson. Oh, no, Tantalus said. The monster stays here. We must decide what to do with him. His name is Tyson, I snapped. The new activities director raised an eyebrow. Tyson saved the camp, I insisted. He pounded the bronze bulls. Otherwise it would have burnt down this whole place. Yes, Tantalus sighed. And what a pity that would have been. Dionysus snickered. Leave us, Tantalus ordered, while we decide this creature's fate. Tyson looked at me with fear in his one eye, but I knew I couldn't disobey a direct order from the camp directors. Not openly, anyway. I'll be right over here, big guy, I promised. Don't worry. We'll find you a good place to sleep tonight. Tyson nodded. I believe you. You are my friend. Which made me feel a whole lot guiltier. I trudged over to the Poseidon table and slumped onto the bench. A wood nymph brought me a plate of Olympian olive and pepperoni pizza, but I wasn't hungry. I'd been almost killed twice today. I managed to end my school year with a complete disaster. Camp Half-Blood was in serious trouble, and Chiron had told me not to do anything about it. I didn't feel very thankful, but I took my dinner, as was customary, up to the bronze brazier and scraped off part of it into the flames. Poseidon, I muttered, accept my offering. And send some help while you're at it, I prayed silently. Please. The smoke from the burning pizza changed into something fragrant. The smell of the clean sea breeze with wildflowers mixed in. I had no idea if that meant my father was really listening. I went back to my seat. I didn't think things could get much worse. Then Tantalus had one of the satyrs blow the conch horn to get our attention for announcements. Yes, well, Tantalus said, once the talking had died down. Another fine meal, or so I'm told. As he spoke, he inched his hand towards the refilled dinner plate, as if maybe the food wouldn't notice what he was doing. But it did. It shot down the table as soon as he got within 6 inches. And on my first day of authority, he continued, I'd like to say what a pleasant form of punishment it is to be here. Over the course of the summer, I hope to interact with each of you. You all look good enough to eat. Dionysus clapped politely, which left to some haphazard applause from the satyrs. Tyson was still standing at the head table, looking uncomfortable. But every time he tried to scoot out of the limelight, Tantalus pulled him back. And now some changes. Tantalus gave the campers a crooked smile. We are reinstating the chariot races. Murmuring broke out at all the tables. Excitement, fear, disbelief. Now I know, Tantalus continued, raising his voice, that the races were discontinued some year ago due to technical problems. 3 deaths and 26 mutilations, someone at the Apollo table called. Yes, Tantalus said, but I know that you will all join me in welcoming the return of this camp tradition. Golden laurels will go to the winning charioteers each month. Teams may register in the morning. The first race will be held in 3 days' time. We will release you from most of your regular activities to prepare your chariots and choose your horses. Oh, and did I mention, the victorious team's cabin will have no chores for the month in which they win? An explosion of excited conversation. No chores for a whole month? No stable cleaning? Was he serious? Then the last person I'd expected to object did so. But, sir, Clarice said. She looked nervous, but she stood up to speak from the Ares table. Some of the campers snickered when they saw the sign on her back. What about patrol duty? I mean, if we drop everything to ready our chariots. Ah, hero of the day, Tantalus exclaimed. Brave Clarice, who single-handedly bested the bronze bulls. Clarice blinked and blushed. I didn't. And modest, too, Tantalus grinned. Not to worry, my dear. This is a summer camp. We're here to enjoy ourselves, yes? But the tree. And now, Tantalus said, as several of Clarice's cabin mates pulled her back into her seat. Before we proceed to the campfire and sing along, one slight housekeeping issue. Percy Jackson and Annabeth Chase have seen fit, for some reason, to bring this here. Tantalus waved a hand towards Tyson. Uneasy muttering spread around the campers. A lot of sideways looks at me. I wanted to kill Tantalus. Now, of course, he said, Cyclopses have a reputation for being bloodthirsty monsters with very small brain capacity. Under normal circumstances, I would release the beast into the woods and have you hunt it down with torches and pointed sticks. But who knows? Perhaps the Cyclops is not as horrible as most of its brethren. Until it proves worthy of destruction, we need a place to keep it. I've thought about the stables, but that will make the horses nervous. Hermes' cabin, possibly? Silence from the Hermes' cabin. Travis and Connor Stoll developed a sudden interest in the tablecloth. I couldn't blame them. The Hermes' cabin was always full to bursting. There was no way they could take a 6'3" Cyclops. Come now, Tantalus chided. The monster may be able to do some menial chores. Any suggestions to where the beast should be kenneled? Suddenly, everyone gasped. Tantalus scooted away from Tyson in surprise. All I could do was stare in disbelief at the brilliant green light that was about to change my life. A dazzling holographic image which appeared above Tyson's head. With a sickening twist in my stomach, I remembered what Annabeth had said about the Cyclopses. They were children of nature, spirits, and gods. Well, one god in particular, usually. Swirling over Tyson was a glowing green trident, the same symbol that had appeared to me the day that Poseidon had claimed me as his son. There was a moment of awed silence. Being claimed was a rare event. Some campers waited their whole lives. When I had been claimed by Poseidon last summer, everyone had knelt. But now they followed Tantalus's lead, and Tantalus roared with laughter. "Well, I think we know where to put the beast now, and by the gods I can see the family resemblance." Everybody laughed except Annabeth and a few of my other friends. Tyson didn't seem to notice. He was too mystified, trying to swat the glowing trident that was now fading over his head. He was too innocent to understand how much they were making fun of him, how cruel people were. But I got it. I had a new cabin mate. I had a monster for a half-brother. That is the end of today's video. Thank you so much for joining me.